By self-surrender and perpetual union with God is meant that men should merge their will wholly in the will of God, and regard their desires at utter nothingness beside his purpose. Whatsoever the Creator commandeth his creatures to observe, the same must they diligently, and with the utmost joy and eagerness, arise and fulfill. They should in no wise allow their fancy to obscure their judgment, neither should they regard their own imaginings as the voice of the Eternal. It behoveth thee to consecrate thyself to the will of God. Whatsoever hath been revealed in his tablets is but a reflection of his will. So complete must be thy consecration, that every trace of worldly desire will be washed from thine heart. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you may prove what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Man declares a river to be a boundary line between two countries, calling this side French and the other side German, whereas the river was created for both and is a natural artery for all. Is it not imagination and ignorance which impels man to violate the divine intention and make the very bounties of God the cause of war, bloodshed, and destruction? Therefore, all prejudices between man and man are falsehoods and violations of the will of God. God desires unity and love. He commands harmony and fellowship. Enmity is human disobedience. God himself is love. As was the will of God, so I ought to have thought. As was the will of God, so I ought to have spoken. As was the will of God, so I ought to have acted. Verily, the will of God acts sometimes in a way for which mankind is unable to find out the reason. The causes and reasons shall appear. Trust in God and confide in him, and resign thyself to the will of God. Verily, thy God is affectionate, compassionate, and merciful, and will cause his mercy to descend upon thee.